If you're looking for something different, Murder Mile covers the untold, unsolved and long-forgotten murders in London's West End. It's researched using the original police investigation files, it's presented as a dramatisation, and it focuses on the victims' lives in an honest, detailed and sympathetic way. Murder Mile is about life, not lunatics. So if you love true crime stories about real murders by regular people in everyday places, then Murder Mile is just for you. Murder Mile was nominated one of the best British true crime podcasts of 2018. So if you love things a little bit different, try Murder Mile.
Welcome to Crime Crazy, the weekly
And
true
Diana
crime
Seacon.
podcast with Erin Plime,
That we know nothing about
where
our
we
legal
prove,
system.
but we're still crazy for a good true crime
Erin?
story.
Awkward
Yes.
pause.
You know what else is
So
awkward?
many
No.
things. Crime Crazy is sponsored by Courtney Ellis, David Hatt,
Yay! Yay! I promised I wouldn't woohoo.
and
This
Paul
is worse.
Schrader, who did not email me to
Hooray!
tell me that I had butchered his name, so I'm going with it. There you go, Paul. That's
Sounds
right.
good. That's your
Show
new name now.
sponsors support Crime Crazy through Patreon at the $10 per month level or above. Thank you. A special thank you to all of our
guys.
Patreon supporters. If you'd like to support Crime Crazy, you can visit our Patreon at patreon.com/crimecrazypod. Or you can buy us a coffee or a donut or like some hosting on Buy Me a Coffee. And you can find all those
Yes.
links on our fantabulous website at crimecrazy.com.
Plus
Yes,
all of
and
our
our
adorable
new
episode
logo
art.
art. Should we put a
I'm
challenge
so
out
excited.
there?
Ooh.
So there's an Easter
What is the
egg in our
challenge?
new art.
There is. Not
Right,
literally,
like the
but
fun Easter
almost
egg.
literally.
Like in one of those Marvel movies that I hear the kids talk about.
Oh,
So hip.
Diana, you're
So
so
in
cool.
touch. All right, so if you find the Easter egg, send me an email in large font, because I am elderly, at Diana at crimecrazy.com. Or if you'd like to use a reasonably sized font, Erin at crimecrazy.com.
That's right. I'm way younger. I can see better.
I don't have any review shoutouts this week, but if you would like one of those, go to your favorite podcasting platform of choice and leave us a review. We give shoutouts for all reviews.
But we like
We
those
do.
5-star
It
ones.
makes us all
the
squee and
best.
happy. It is.
It's very true. Literally
It's-
squee, but
yeah,
we won't do
nobody
that for
needs
you. We promise.
And you can follow us on all the social medias at Crime Crazy Pod.
Hooray! So, I mean, other than
I
the
think
awkward
so.
pause, that was better.
We still got an awkward pause in, so you know.
Yes. Well, I mean, I do appreciate us, like, you slowly
Yes, yes, yes,
transitioning
yes.
us in. Also, I think if they find the Easter egg on our art, that maybe we should reward them with, like, a shout out, or we'll say the first 3 people will say their special
we
message
should,
or
because
something.
I was
funny
thinking
like that.
about like sending stickers or something, but I feel like we just do that for
But we
everyone.
just do that.
So let's do that.
Yeah.
So if you find the Easter egg in our new art, and if you're wondering which is the new art, it is the one that has the brown colorway.
And I also just made
Oh.
it the front cover of our website. So it is as of
All
this
right. So if you find the
moment,
Easter
front
egg
cover of our
in
website.
the front cover of our website, then send that to Diana at crimecrazy.com along with the message you would like us to read on air.
That's right. Can they Can they DM us? Or does it have to be an email?
I mean, it doesn't matter.
Just for clarification.
But I really like getting...
Okay.
I like getting email
anyway,
through my fancy new email address that isn't spam.
It's pretty...
It is kind of exciting.
It's kind of exciting. So did you learn
and
anything?
I've been that was a good transition.
Did you
it wasn't awkward at all.
Right?
So I found this thing out.
Oh no.
And I've been debating whether or not to tell you because you're still mad at me about the whole H.H. Holmes situation.
Okay, is it teeth?
Yeah.
It's teeth, right? Okay, let me take a drink before
it's
you
at
start
least
talking.
short. So let's say you are in colonial America, mid to late 1700s.
I don't have toothbrush, but I do have sugar.
I mean, maybe. I don't know what you were up to in colonial America. I was busy trying to figure out how to teleport to the future where there's plumbing. Oh,
yeah, and air conditioning.
Anyway, so let's say you still do have a tooth. Mm-hmm. And that... Oh. But that tooth is giving you trouble.
Oh, no.
What variety of professional would you go to?
A vet? I don't know.
Well, no, because that's
not
going to
be a dentist.
Also, they couldn't do anything anyway.
Yeah.
So I asked my family in-house if they knew this, and my sister said immediately, the barber.
Yeah.
So
well, okay,
that is most
actually
people's
been my
guess,
guess.
but it would not necessarily be the barber. It would probably be the blacksmith.
That was
No
going to be
way.
my second guess.
You
oh
do
my
rock
God,
at this.
I rock at this. Yes. It was going to be like, who else has pliers?
So they
The
wouldn't have used
blacksmith.
pliers. They would have used a tooth key, which is just about as horrible as you think it is. Yeah.
Oh my
so we're
God.
not talking about that because I did not look into it. Right. So let me tell you the cheerful part of this fact. So I've been in a bit of a funk lately, which you may have picked up on. I think so. I mean, I haven't had a professional look at them, and I don't know any blacksmiths. But so when I'm down, I like to listen to the same thing over and over. So I've been re-listening to The Dollop. And there's a whole episode on colonial teeth that talks about like dentistry during the colonial era and how it became a real profession and all that kind of stuff. And the thing that struck me was this fact, not necessarily because it is horrific and horrifying and all of that, but also because I have definitely listened to that episode at least once before and did not remember that one. I know.
Oh, God, Diana.
Related, I'm going to have you run my thing on Thursday and Friday because I'm not coming in to see what you're going to do to me.
I mean, I'm going to participate in your thing on Thursday and Friday, but I'm not running it. But I'll be in the room with you in front of all of those poor innocent new hires who are going to see their very first murder.
I mean, justifiably so. First H.H. Holmes and now this. Okay.
Wow, I'm
why
feeling
don't
a
you
little faint. Let's move on to like horrific.
Yeah. So why don't you go ahead and take a big slug of that liquor and talk to me about murder?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Whew. All right. Well, Diana,
Ooh,
I learned something
good.
as well. But I learned about our legal system.
God damn it.
So that's what you
hold
get
on
for
just
talking to me
a
about
minute.
teeth.
You didn't know for sure I was going to talk to you about teeth.
Oh, I knew. You said I was going to throw up
And
while
then I
we
said not to do
recorded.
that
It
'cause
had
we'd
to be
lose
teeth.
listeners. No.
I know. I didn't do it.
I think that the moment has passed,
It was close.
so I think you're all good again.
Oh, I'm gonna have
Drink 'em
nightmares.
away.
Okay. So, yes. I'm going to snuggle my puppy really hard all night. He has no teeth. It's okay. 2 weeks ago on Crime Crazy, I finished up the 3-parter on the Colonial Parkway murders, right, which are still unsolved. But even though they are still unsolved, there is DNA, and there's a very real chance that the DNA evidence may, at some future date, give us the answers and give those 8 families the answers that they have been looking for. So, continuing that, we're going to talk about crimes involving DNA evidence.
Is it OJ? Cool, because he did it.
It is not. Well, yes.
I mean, apparently there's still some debate on that.
No. So, August 25th, 1981, which falls in this magical period of time in which I was not yet born,
I was
but
in
you were.
first grade. Or entering, I guess, August.
Was barely conceived.
Whippersnapper. Did I tell you that even Liam has started talking about how goddamn old I am?
Yes. We forgot to mention last time we recorded about our wonderful team meeting where our boss talked about how old you were the entire meeting. It was just joke after joke after joke about
There's
your
no
age.
HR
It
here.
was great.
It was pretty epic.
All right. So anyway, this is actually a sad day. So
Kind of a
we're
big-
gonna get back on topic. So Jeannie Moore was hitchhiking. She was 18 years old. She was trying to get to her job at a gas station. It was about 7 a.m. And witnesses later said that they saw her get into a car. And they were able to give, like, it was a Ford something, which got me thinking that if I ever witness a crime involving a car, we are in trouble. I'll never in a million years be able to tell you the first thing about that car. It was black. That's it.
You'd think as much
How
as
many
I
doors?
Uber,
No.
I would have learned a little something
6.
about cars. No.
Nope. I got picked up in a minivan the other day. When it pulled up, I was like, oh, yeah, that is a minivan.
I can reliably identify RAV4s because I own one.
Yeah. I'm pretty good at Honda Odyssey. Yeah, same. I have no clue what David's car is. It's a Mazda.
Oh, I know
red
Jeff's
car.
car was a Corolla because we referred to it as the Corolla.
The Corolla. Yep. Yeah, they're always like, late model, blah, 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 blah. What the hell is a late model?
Yes. Anywho.
Anyway, so they remembered what the car looked like, what color it was. It was a Ford this or that. One of them was Galaxy. I just remember that. And they remember that she tried to get in the passenger door. Like, the driver pulled over and she tried to get in the passenger side door and couldn't open it for some reason. And so the driver, who was definitely a man, had to lean over and let her in. But no one got a good enough look at him to really be able to describe him. That was the last time anyone saw her alive.
Can we just again state the date was 1981, which is just after the 70s, which is the decade I like to think of as the decade of the American drifter
Everyone
killer.
got killed by... Yeah.
Bad fashion,
I agree.
lots of drifters.
Right. Yeah. So anyway, 5 days later, on August 30th, her body was found by some picnickers who were at Jeunesse Park looking for a place to have lunch. And they found her instead and presumably then proceeded to not have lunch. She had been raped and murdered, and the cause of death was blunt force trauma to her head. Yep. So the crime scene actually yielded quite a bit of evidence because they had the witnesses who saw the car, which I guess is not actually crime scene evidence, but evidence. There was a ton of media support. They found DNA from the rape on her body. Like, there was no attempt to hide that whatsoever. Also, it was pretty early days.
Right, but
for
still,
DNA.
you don't leave things behind at the crime scene, so to speak.
Right. They tried to use all of this. They ran the DNA through, or they, ran it through and got the sequence and all of that. They didn't really have anything to compare it with. And this was, either early days or pre-CODIS. I don't remember when CODIS started, but there was no way, like with DNA, if you don't have someone to match it to, it's absolutely useless.
Well, they couldn't even match it to the extent that they do now, because we didn't really know what the sequencing was until the early 2000s. So they could have done like secretor, non-secretor, blood type, some other stuff.
Blood type. And yeah. But either way, they never really had a suspect. They never really made any arrests for 38
Good God,
years.
That's almost as old as you are.
Almost, but not quite. But you know what? No, actually, it's older than me. It's almost as old as you are.
That was a while ago.
It's almost as old as you were when I was born.
That's about right.
Like that you didn't even deny that. You're like, yeah, we'll go with that. I'm twice as old as you. So anyway, no arrests. There was a lot of media attention. I actually, while I was researching this, watched a couple, because it's come back into the news recently, which I'll tell you about in a second. But I watched a couple of the original clips from right after it happened. And it was a lot of, sort of, what is that called? Like forensic files style shows and interviews with people sitting down. This is where she was found, and here's her mom, and blah, blah, blah. And just, it was really, really heart-wrenching. The mom was really pitiful, like just so sad. Anyway, none of that helped. And for 38 years, no answers whatsoever. Now her parents have passed, but she does have a bunch of siblings. I think all sisters, actually. I want to say there were something like 5 or 6 sisters. Lots
My
of
aunt
girls.
is one of 7 girls. It's a lot of girls.
Oof. That's a lot of girls. Yeah, I have 1. That's enough. So this past May, like a couple months ago, police decided, it's a cold case. Let's just shot in the dark. Let's try this new technology, this new thing that we're doing with DNA. And they submitted her DNA, or the DNA that was found on her body, to Family Tree DNA, which is one of those sites where you can submit your own DNA and get your genetic profile and learn about your family history and where you came from and all of this. So it's like 23andMe or Ancestry.com. But the big difference is, well, there are a couple big differences between Family Tree DNA and 23andMe or Ancestry.com or some of those that you hear advertised all the time. One of them is just scale. Because until 2018, Family Tree DNA was this completely unheard of, tiny little organization that ran this service, and no one knew anything about them. Another difference is that Family Tree DNA is one of a couple of sites. That one and the other one is called GED Match, where they will let law enforcement look at their DNA or their DNA profile, their DNA profiles. It's a new thing that they are doing to look for suspects. Okay, so that's what the FBI did. So before I go on from there, just a little bit of a background. So currently, there are a couple of sites that do cooperate with law enforcement officials. Pretty much the way that it is written is it has to be them looking for the perpetrator of a violent crime. And it's in the terms and conditions. When you send your DNA off, they're like, hey, yeah, this, FBI will have access to this to make a familial match. And if you don't want them to do that, you need to opt out. Ancestry and 23andMe, which are the two bigger ones that we hear about all the time, they do not cooperate with law enforcement. It is in their policies that they can't, that's private information that nobody can get a hand on. However, what you can do if you still would like your DNA to be tested is to, if you've done, I did 23andMe some time ago, I could email them and have them submit the results to one of these other companies, and that would opt me in, right? And then they could test my genetics against any samples that they have. Okay. So the way that it would then work is you test against the samples. There's some overlap. They know that you must be a relative. And then investigators will sort of backwards construct your family tree to try to figure out where the actual match is. Okay. So they did this with the DNA that they found on Jeannie, and they found a match right away. And they were really, really surprised. Well, it was a partial match. It was a familial match. And we won't ever know who that person is because this is evidence that, I mean, it's like got some amount of privacy. That name is disclosed to the police. They can use that to investigate. It's not going to be entered as evidence in court because they're not trying to prove anything about the person whose DNA it was. They just used that as a tool to get to somebody close enough that they could do a DNA test. So the only thing that we know is that whoever it is that submitted this DNA was some kind of relative to Donald Stephen Perea. Right. So I wish I knew more about how they did that. Like, I wish that I could just see the chart and like really I find that kind of thing really fascinating, maybe because my family tree is like all kinds of messed up because all my kids are randomly adopted from other people who may or may not be related to me, but I think that's really fascinating going backwards. So they did manage to trace it backwards. They didn't manage to find the person to test the DNA. Instead, they found his biological daughter. Okay, so this is Donald Stephen Perea's biological daughter, and they asked her for a DNA sample. Can you imagine that conversation? So in this case, and I'll tell you a little bit more in a second, like it probably wasn't all that surprising to her. But can you imagine if it was? Like you submitted your DNA on the off chance, or you didn't, but some third cousin twice removed did. And then one day you get a call from the FBI, hey, we think that your dad may have raped and murdered a girl who was probably about your age. Can we test your DNA?
So I got subpoenaed this week for a 911 call I made several months ago. And when the county attorney called me, they didn't tell me anything because they didn't have any of my information because I was a 911 caller. They had my first name and my phone number, so they didn't have anything else. And so she called and she's like, hey, do you remember a 911 call you made in the spring of this year? And I was like...
And you were like,
no?
What?
Can you tell me more? And she's like, well... you saw something and you called 911. I'm like, oh, fuck. Okay. But like, she didn't say anything until I was like, oh, yeah. I remember that.
Right. Yeah. Well, so yeah, do you call? Like, I mean, do you say
so
why you're calling?
That was my point. I'm not sure that they would. I wonder if they would call and say, hey, you know, we're from whatever police department. We're working on an unsolved case. We think a family member might have something to do with it. Can we have a chat and maybe a little spit?
Yeah, I
guess
guess so.
I mean, I'd be willing to bet like that was maybe a conversation in.
And I feel like she probably knew, which
but you can't count on
just
that.
a second.
Like, if somebody sat you down right now, it's like, hey, so think about all your third cousins. Which one's the murderer?
Oh, yeah. But this was the daughter of the criminal.
Yeah.
So I think she knew, like, she would have known if the FBI called her.
That's a
It was
nice
probably
place
about
to be.
dad. All right. So the daughter was like, yep, here's my DNA. And the police tested it against the sample. And they were able to conclude that Perea, not the daughter, but the father, was 3.3 trillion times more likely than any other possible person to have killed more.
Like, pretty sure. Yeah.
So it was him. Yeah, it was him.
What was that? 3 point something trillion?
So another 3.3 trillion times more likely than any other person. And I'm fairly certain that includes
made up
theoretical
people, my imaginary friend, like, fictional characters.
Right. Yeah. Like any combination of
genes.
genes.
Crazy number.
Yeah. Yeah, right? So another option for this testing could have been to exhume Perea and test his DNA against the sample, which is occasionally done, especially when it's like a super violent crime and they're, whatever. But since the family was willing to cooperate, they decided they didn't need to go that route and that match was going to be statistically close enough to say conclusively he did it. Especially since it's not like they could then prosecute him. I mean, he is at this point,
but
spoiler, he's dead.
No, but
Well,
I
then
wonder
that
if down the road,
wouldn't be an
since so many
option.
more people are opting for cremation than like full burial, I wonder if in 50 years people will be like, well, if he hadn't been cremated.
Well, or will they just take samples? Like when we brought Tobin home from the hospital, they gave us a sample of his
Which
DNA.
is interesting because they didn't do that with Liam.
That was like, oh yeah, they did. They were like, so we have it on file and you have it on file, and then if he goes missing or something horrible happens,
yeah, I'm
like,
pretty sure
now
they
we
just
have
told
it.
us to be careful.
Yeah. No, they looked at me and they were like, here, let's have a backup. Okay, so here's what we actually know happened. Since both people are now dead, we won't ever have the whole story, right? There's no one to ask what actually happened. We can't question him. But we do know that this makes me so mad. Perea had been charged with a different violent rape before this crime. And on August 25th, 1981, when he abducted and killed Jeannie, he was out on bond awaiting trial for the violent rape.
Ew.
He was 23 years old, which, he died in his 50s. He died very young. The original rape he was then convicted of. And guess how long he spent in prison?
Oh, I'm going to say 2 years and 3 months. Oh, so close.
3 years. Yep. He went to prison in 1982, which I was born in 1982, but like halfway through the year. So, and he was out by 1985, which was the year my sister was born, if we're keeping track. After that time, he was never again arrested. And so his DNA never made it into any kind of database. Which I do find interesting with two violent rapes, one of them murder, happening very close together. Although the second one maybe was just, I've got nothing to lose. I don't know. But that happened really, really close together. He left his DNA both times.
Right.
Presumably. Well, I don't know about the first one. It may have just been an identification or whatever else. But he was essentially kind of caught both times. Did he just get good at it after that? Did he stop? Were those 3 years in prison like enough to change him? What happened? Because he was alive for another 30 years after, and it just seems really unlikely to me that.
Well, and
he was like,
wasn't
I got
old
it out of my
enough
system.
to like age out. Like a lot of people, especially with deviant sexual behavior, tend to kind of age out.
Yeah. Well, yeah. No, he would have still been
Well, and even at the
strong
time that he
and
died, if he
young
was in his
and-
mid-50s, he wasn't yet to the point where a lot of people just kind of give it up.
Mm-mm. I mean, maybe, and I don't know what his family life was like. Like, I know he had a daughter, a biological daughter, that knew him, and people knew they were related. So presumably he was in some way part of her life.
Yeah.
I don't, like, maybe he got married and that was good enough.
But what about the wife? I mean...
Oh, I know. I can't imagine. I can't imagine. But so that's why I was saying that I bet the daughter wasn't all that surprised when they called, because she knew he had spent time in prison for violent sexual assault. Like, this was not a surprise that that was what her dad did. Also, I don't know how old the daughter was because they didn't give very much information on her. I didn't actually even find a name. But I also don't, that means I don't know if she existed before the rape
or
and the
if she
murder.
was far after. Because, I mean, even if she was far after, she could be a reasonable grown-up. As I see every week with our new hires
Yeah.
when I see
Oh,
that
yeah.
they were born after I graduated from college. Oh,
That's because you're really old. So that is my depressing story. I mean, it's not depressing. Ultimately, Jeannie's sisters know who it is that raped and murdered their sister. And even though they'll never be able to confront him and he'll never get punished for it, like, they don't have to wonder, and at least he's dead.
Yeah.
He's not going to hurt anybody else.
And maybe didn't after? Great big question mark?
Maybe not. Right. Certainly has not been linked, and now his DNA is in a system. So it would be possible to link him to other unsolved cases. And none of the articles that I read mentioned anything about anyone like trying to test against it or any inquiries or like any other cases that they thought might be related, which, I mean, it was only in May and it is now September. But it doesn't take very long. Like, I feel like there could have been some mention if that was the case. And there are 48 other cases we're comparing to him, you know, whatever.
Well, and I feel like
it didn't seem to be the case.
That's enough time that because there was a hit, other law enforcement with some unsolved cases that seemed like similar might have moved that to the top of their queue to have a look. Yeah, absolutely. Well, especially, so, and one of the other things that I didn't mention, but you and I had talked about the Golden State Killer. He was the reason that the investigators, so there was somebody assigned to like the cold case files, and this was one of his cases, and he saw that case happen and was like, okay, you know what, let me just give it a shot. I have DNA in this case, let's just see what happens. And that's, you know, how all this came. So yeah, it's definitely, that seems to kind of be how it works. Like, this is big news. You see it, you're like, oh wait, I have this, and this. Let's test it. Which I realize I talk about the Colonial Parkway murders a whole lot, but I'm just saying, guys, have you tried this route? Just not just with Colonial Parkway, but with lots of other crimes we've talked about, and many that we haven't. Like, just the fucking.
Mm-hmm. So, okay. That brings me to what I really wanted to talk about. Which is, I am still torn about the ethics of this whole thing. And so I want to give you some background, which I found surprising because I don't follow current news, apparently. And also, I read a couple of interesting articles kind of about the ethics and the reliability and like all of that kind of stuff. Okay. All of that being said, I'm also going to bash on North Carolina a little bit more. Sorry, guys. All right. So one of the articles I read was really, really fascinating. And it was about how law enforcement got into these couple of companies that they are now into and like how all of that started.
No.
Do you know about this? Oh, I'm going to teach you and you're going to be mad. So what happened is in 2018, Family Tree DNA discovered that some of the samples that had been submitted to them were not in fact submitted by the people whose DNA they were. They were submitted by the FBI in order to try to find a familial
that's shady
match.
as fuck.
Wait, keep going. Hold on. Okay, so what happens on these sites, like I know with the 23andMe one at least, sometimes they do some sort of medical research related to genetics or like mental health or migraines or whatever. And sometimes, you know, people just do it because they're interested in their history, whatever. They will say, you know, oh, there are these 5 distant cousins that we found whose DNA has also been submitted through our site. And you can subscribe to this membership, fill out this form, pay me this amount of money, whatever, and we'll connect you. Okay. And so I think that's what the FBI was going for. Was like, if we put this in there, they're going to say, oh, there are 13 people who match, you know, some part of your history. And then maybe we can find out what we're doing, which is extremely clever. Like, whoever had that idea is shady as fuck, but it's really brilliant. So Family Tree DNA found out they were doing this. And instead of being like, hold on a moment, our terms and conditions, A, forbid this, and B, that's just not cool. Instead, they were like, actually, we fully support this, And so they changed their terms and conditions and never told anyone.
That is
and no one
also
reads those
shady
things
as fuck.
anyway. Right? So everything goes on as normal, right? FBI is happy, Family Tree DNA is happy, crimes are being solved, there's all sorts of ethical crap going on. And then BuzzFeed found out about
They
it.
are weirdly
And
a decent news source.
Right? I was like, BuzzFeed, wait, let me
Yeah,
find this in
no,
another
they've
article.
broken some interesting shit in the last few years.
Yeah. So they did some digging and kind of brought this to light. And Family Tree DNA was finally like, yep, no, that's totally what we did. We changed our policies. We fully support the law enforcement using our services in order to solve violent crimes. Not non-violent offenses, not robberies and drug crimes and blah, 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 but just when somebody gets hurt, yep, come in and do it. And weirdly, this not only didn't really cost them any customers by admitting they had secretly changed their terms and conditions in order to lock people up, but they actually in some way, like they increased their catalog because people who had taken tests on Ancestry and 23andMe were like, well, our services won't cooperate with law enforcement. We want our DNA in this database to help solve crimes. And so they've submitted their genetic profiles. So I just thought that was really interesting. And one of the articles I was reading put it as basically like, apparently Americans are really good with sending their family members to jail. But what they pointed out was, I mean, it's not a terrible thing. If your family member's a violent offender, like,
Yeah.
maybe it's
Maybe
good
not show up
that
at
they
the
go
next
to
family
jail.
reunion.
But also, right. B, you're probably not sending your brother who you love dearly and had no idea he was a serial killer to prison. It's like your fifth cousin twice removed that you've never met. Like, it's not somebody it's somebody you're related to. You can feel like you're contributing, but it's not going to actually affect you.
Yeah, it's pretty removed.
And so it doesn't seem
Well,
like
even if it was
a big
you, you don't know that it's you. It could have been your fifth cousin once removed that had the DNA that put your brother in jail. Or it could have been yours.
Sure.
There's some plausible
absolutely.
deniability there.
Yeah. Right. Well, and I don't know if it's so much, I mean, I guess some of it could be like guilt over, like, what if they find out?
Or that, I subjected them.
But I think,
I mean, not that it's rational, but I have subjected my serial killer brother to prison.
right. Yeah. No, that's true. You
Yeah.
don't have to take the personal guilt. But yeah. So I'm thinking about this, and I do not approve of the way that it was done. That was shady. It was very smart. Ultimately, I believe that everybody involved believed they were doing a bad thing for a good reason. At least I really, really want to believe that. But I still have some issues. So we were having a conversation about the ethics of DNA profiling this way. And talking about like reliability and, whether it's sort of violating someone else's profile or personal like privacy because your profile overlaps with them. And, basically I could, if everyone submits their DNA, then they can build your profile, reverse engineer it and all of that. But so I was reading this other article. Actually, I read a couple other articles. I went down a rabbit hole on this one. And one of them had done some polling to find out how people felt about this. And I thought it was really interesting. So they polled about 700 genealogists who obviously are in favor of constructing family trees because that's what they do. Right. And 85% of that group said they were at least relatively comfortable with this kind of DNA matching. So then they polled a broader group. Baylor College of Medicine did a survey of about 2,000 people that were just like everyday people. And 91% of those people were in support of this kind of testing when it was in relation to violent crimes, and 46% for nonviolent offenders. However, more reading turns up that in in describing what the technology was so that they could ask people if they thought this was good or bad, they gave an example, which was the Golden State Killer. And so the fact that 91 people were like, well, hell yeah, is probably biased.
This is how we caught the Golden State Killer. Do you think this is a good idea? Fuck yeah, it's a good idea.
Yes.
Can we
I
catch him
do,
again?
actually. Right. So here are my concerns. The DNA evidence has also been shown in polls and in studies, especially of like prospective jurors and all of this, to be one of those kind of buzzwords, right? If I'm the prosecutor and I say, we have DNA evidence that proves so-and-so did it, then as a juror, I am more likely, or they are more likely to stop listening at that point and be like, well, then he's guilty. Like, there's a lot better technology than there was 20 years ago, but there's also a whole lot more crime drama and a whole lot more like forensic dramas and I mean even true crime, right, which is only ever going to show these things. And so people think, well, DNA is like you stick it in a computer and it says yes it's you or no it's not, the end. But there's actually so much human interaction involved that this is where I get iffy, right? Because people on juries will stop listening when you say there's DNA evidence, and they won't then listen to things like, well, here's how it was collected. Here's how it was handled. Here's the potential for lab error. Here is where corruption may have come into this. Here is, maybe we did all of those things right, but that DNA happened to be on the victim. That does not necessarily mean it was the murderer's DNA. Like in the case of a rape, that's different. But, I come in contact with somebody, there is the slightest potential that person is not the one, left their DNA without being the one who then immediately killed me. Also, at least of 2016, in some states, North Carolina, labs were given a stipend or a bonus for any samples that they ran that produced a conviction. $600 per conviction. So I'm a lab who is supposed to be completely unbiased, but I know if I tell you what you want to hear, I get a bonus.
Whose stupid fucking idea was that?
I will just say that when I did the research for untested rape kits, North Carolina had more than any other state.
Except for the people that we know and love in North Carolina. Y'all are crazy.
I know.
Stay to yourselves.
I have spent a lot of time
I love North Carolina.
I actually really enjoy it there.
Pretty.
But what the hell, guys? You need to work out your DNA issues like
right
I'm not
now.
feeling
Also,
safe.
basing any sort of reward on a conviction, have we not thoroughly proven that that is always a bad fucking idea?
I don't see how you could justify it at all, honestly. Like, no, I don't get it. I can't think of
no. And if you want to,
okay. I mean, if it doesn't convince you to cheat the system or to give me false results in some way, right? Which I'm hoping $600 would not convince you.
How much is the average lab worker in North Carolina making?
Well, I have a guess.
I mean, I make decent money, and I wouldn't turn down $600 because our boss thought I did a stellar job today.
Right. But you also wouldn't send someone to prison
You don't know that.
for $600 if you knew that they did.
I mean, it depends who it is. There's some people I'd get rid of.
Diana, I swear, I worry about you.
I probably wouldn't.
But also, how on earth is it the DNA's, like, how is that doing a better job?
Well, and that's the thing. This is a pretty
lab.
binary thing, right? It's not like handwriting analysis or even fingerprint analysis, which is really subjective.
It's not as binary.
But it should
as you
be.
think.
You take the sections, you line them up, they match, they don't match.
But it's Yeah, but it's not. So it is becoming more and more as we get computers more involved in it. And I couldn't actually find a lot about what the state of that was at the moment. But as of like 4 years ago, some of the articles I was reading, it was very much like fingerprint analysis in most cases. There were sort of two options where on the one hand, you have people look at it and say it's a match or it's not a match, and they didn't always come to the same conclusion. Or there were some computerized options, but they were still sort of in that black box, like, we're going to give you the DNA, and then you're going to give us the answer, but no one will tell us how it works. So, yeah. And I think it has, I mean, I know that it has progressed leaps and bounds since then, but that's only a couple of years
but
ago.
it also seems, I mean, I'm not a professional of anything, but you know, once you sequenced and you knew what goes where and what the different options are, I'm just really surprised that there's still that level of human interaction.
I think a pure DNA sample taken from one person, like if I spit into a vial and send it to Ancestry.com, is very different than DNA collected from a crime scene, where it's probably a mix of a bunch of different samples, or at least several different samples. And you may not have very much of it. You might have to, you know, they can take these itty bitty little samples and replicate genes and get enough to then test, which then my brain is just like, oh my God, this seems like an area for things to go really wrong. And I don't know anything about it, so I don't know. But yeah, no, it's, I think it's messier than we think it is. Or at least it was a couple years ago, and we've been putting people away on DNA evidence for a lot longer than a couple years. Because it's the gold standard,
right? Like, we've figured out that almost everything else is garbage.
Yeah. Well, and this is not garbage. It's absolutely, like, definitive.
That's right.
If everything goes right. Right? And I forget what the case is. Maybe you know. There was one really early on, I want to say in the 90s, where they linked all of these crimes together, like just tons of crimes all over the country. They were like, oh my God, we have this super criminal on our hands. And it turned out it was DNA transfer from somebody that worked in the plant that did the swabs. I
don't remember who it was, but I remember hearing about that. But it was, like some dude at the plant that just touched everything.
Right.
And not maliciously, just like touched everything.
But even something... Yeah, he just wasn't particularly careful. Even stuff like that can definitely happen, right? Like, there's all kinds of things. There was a case that was overturned recently where after, I don't even know how many years this guy was in jail, they went back and they looked at it again. He got some sort of appeal, and the lab ended up admitting that they had swapped his sample and, like, the perp DNA in the lab. They'd gotten them mixed up, so it was a perfect match because they tested perp DNA against perp DNA. And then they sent him to prison. Like, there's just so much room for human error, right? If it was just magic,
right, or more, I really
but there are
thought
people
it was
involved,
much more automated than this.
Well, and I think it is much more automated since the information that I was just reading about, right? Because I know, like, it has changed so much just in the past couple of years. Even like the Ancestry.com type sites have changed so much in the past couple of years. I get updates all the time about like all these things that I guess I believe. But regardless, it still starts with a person taking DNA evidence from what is almost definitely not a pristine scene. And then there's handling all the way. And even if a computer does all the matching, then there's handling on the other side. Like, it's so full of people. So I don't know. I would really, really hate to ever think that I contributed to a relative or any person being convicted of a crime they didn't commit because there was a mistake in, and I realize it wouldn't be my fault, but there was a mistake in DNA evidence and they used my DNA to link those people.
I was surprised when we were talking about this earlier, much like I was when this whole cell phone, like the government spying on our cell phone thing happened. Like when that broke, I remember being like, oh, I assumed they were doing that. Like, was this a secret?
Yes.
Oh,
I know. Like,
right.
with the
Yeah.
echoes.
Obviously,
Like,
it's
of course
listening.
it's listening to me.
How else does
has
it
to
know I
listen
want
to
it?
me. Right.
So when you told me that Ancestry and 23andMe, which I've used neither of, didn't cooperate with law enforcement, I was surprised because I kind of thought everybody did. And I'm also surprised
Yeah.
that hasn't been challenged. That, law enforcement somewhere might have reason to believe that 23andMe and Ancestry has something that could help them and they subpoena it.
Maybe, but I am willing to bet that if their stance is that that this is private information and you signed a thing saying it was you understood it was private information, that they put up a pretty good legal defense to knock that down. Very much like recordings from the Echo that Amazon was like, we don't have them. We're not going to cooperate. There's nothing to give you, which may be true or it may be total BS, but either way,
but
that's
right,
their
but my
reputation.
doctor's notes can be subpoenaed, even a psychiatrist's. My employment records can be
no, that's true.
Can be subpoenaed, and unlike some of the information I may have given my doctor involuntarily, because I don't really know what they're looking for when they take 8 vials of blood. Like, I've spit in a tube. I understand I'm sending my DNA out of my home into some place.
Into some place that's going to immediately create a report.
That's going to look at it and going to do things about it.
Well,
so, I don't know. I don't... Yeah. Maybe because I assumed it was happening, I don't particularly have a problem in... if I send in my DNA and it's somehow used to get my 5th cousin, what's his name, on a murder, like, cool.
If you did it.
I mean, it's my cousin. You've met me.
Guys, Diana portrays herself on this podcast as, like, kind of a monster.
What do you mean on this podcast?
She's not. She knits. She has an adorable family, a beautiful old home.
Oh my god.
She's covered in hives. I don't know what that has to do
Nothing.
with her criminal
I'm just
background,
very itchy.
but
So I don't know. I guess I don't have a particular problem, but especially because the more I learn about like how advertising works, which I try not to learn a lot about because it's very infuriating. Like, we're going to get to the point where they're going to figure that shit out anyway. That they're going to look at my Target spending habits and be like, you know what? I bet that bitch is about to murder somebody. But, you've heard of the Target test case. I don't want to keep picking on Target, but they're really good at it. Of the Target ad that figured out the girl was pregnant before anybody else figured out that she was pregnant.
Yes.
They're going to start figuring out that behavioral shit and applying algorithms. So, DNA is easier than behavioral algorithms. We think by the fact that she bought, 2 bags of Reese's Peanut Butter Cups instead of her usual 1 bag of Reese's Peanut Butter Cups, that this means that there's going to be a vehicular homicide in her near future. And I think it does.
Sounds
I do love my peanut butter cups, but like, I feel that's a lot more iffy than something that actually has some science-based rather than behavioral-based. Because the one thing that I learned in all of the economics classes I took in college is that all economic models are based on the behavior of the reasonable man, and not a single human acts like the reasonable man.
Right. Absolutely. I just would feel so much better about the DNA part, too, if there weren't so many people involved.
So that is what brings me pause, because I did not realize there was still so much handling to this.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, even like on a crime drama, there has to be. There has to be so much handling of it.
I seem to forget that I don't watch a lot of those. And back in the X-Files days,
Diana,
like,
let me tell you. Yeah. Even on Criminal Minds, there's a hell of a lot of handling.
I'm going to have to take your word for it.
No, but yeah, I don't know. I think that everyone really wants to believe, that there is now some sort of answer. Like, we've progressed technologically. We have learned from our past mistakes. There is something concrete that we can say, you know what, if nothing else, it's this. Because it's not witnesses.
No.
It's not fingerprints. It's not lie detector tests. Like,
it's
all
not
of
hair,
these things we wanted
fiber,
it to be. And it's
not
definitely
blah, blah, blah,
not. Right. So at this point, is it DNA? And I think everyone is like, oh, yeah, it's DNA. Thank God.
Yeah, but we thought
DNA.
that about
But
fingerprints.
and I'm not paranoid. I know. I'm not like a conspiracy theorist. Like, that's not where my personality goes for the most part. I'm on the side of law enforcement and solving crimes and, like, hope that everybody really is doing the right thing for the right reasons. But this podcast is
and I started out as a skeptic. But, you know, I don't know. When you think about the things that our grandparents held as truths, and it's fun to think sometimes, like, so, you know, my kid's 10, I'm 44. Like, when I was 10, we hadn't found the Titanic yet. I've been listening to the last podcast series about Mormonism, and we've been talking about it. But one of the things that they mentioned was that when Joseph Smith found the golden plates and translated them, he said that the language was Reformed Egyptian because at that time, this is pre-Rosetta Stone.
Oh, so no
right.
could be
And
like,
he
that's bullshit.
assumed there would never be something found. Egyptian was just a lost language. We weren't going to decipher it. We had tried so hard and we didn't get anywhere until the Rosetta Stone.
Oh my
BT Dubs,
God.
which I saw in England, amazing. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm jealous of that.
So I don't know. That's not an
Yeah.
easy question. I thought it was a much easier question when you asked it earlier.
It's mind-boggling. I know. Well, and you made the comment when we were talking earlier about, well, I don't think we need to question the technology. It's the, you know, it's the ethics and the privacy and the blah, blah, blah. But the technology is good. And I was like, okay, yeah, that's totally, of course the technology is good. And then I started reading about it. I was like,
no,
oh my
it's
God,
not.
it's not good. It's not okay.
So
So I'm sure we'll get a million corrections about everything that I just said. But
We're
I
amateurs,
swear
guys.
I read a lot.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I wonder when we'll start seeing overturning from mishandled DNA.
Well, it's happening. It actually happens a lot. One of the articles I was reading, which is the broken record, one of the articles I read, was talking about, and I'll link all of these in show notes. So, and they are also all linked to each other probably. But it was talking about a mom who, her son was sent to prison for a rape, and she just knew he didn't do it. I think he was a minor too at the time. He was like older, but
Right.
but still young, like 16 or 17. And she just knew that he didn't do it. And then there was this news show that she was watching, and it sort of shed light into here's how all of this was messed up and blah, blah, blah. And she was like, I knew it. And then appealed and managed to get him out. But in that case, in his case, it was the samples were compared. There was some overlap, because here's the thing, it's not like everyone in the Seacon line has
Right.
these genes only and everyone in the Plime line has these genes only. There's overlap.
share a
We share
lot.
some genetics. We share most of it, but even in the sections where there are going to be differences, it's still a
Right.
finite number, right? And so there's still some overlap. So he was not a match, but there was some overlap. And prosecution made a big deal out of that. And even though the person who tested it, they gave her name in the article and quoted her and everything, was like, I knew. Like, it wasn't him. It wasn't a match. But there was enough of a match. They convinced a jury there was a match.
So
I don't know why that was okay to even bring up in court. If there was not a conclusive match, I feel like the judge should have thrown it out, but I also know nothing about the legal
So this
system.
goes back to something that I think about every once in a while, which is it time for us as a country, and maybe other countries, but I know even less about their legal system than I do about our own, do we need to rethink the kinds of professionals that we have as judges and jurors? Because I feel like if I were called on a case with any sort of anything, really, like, I feel like I wouldn't know enough to make a reasonable judgment, especially if it is something like a very long prison term that is going to ruin somebody's life. If it's something like that, where the lab tech is saying is like, this is still totally in the reason of error. I don't think this is a match. But the judge must have looked at them and like, nope, throw it in. It's good. What is that judge's level of competence in understanding that sort of material? In theory, he's a lawyer, not a scientist, like legit.
In practice, he's a lawyer, not a scientist. Which I think that's a big part of forensic science issues. That's why now we're like, fingerprints, no. Fibers, no. Hair samples, no. Handwriting analysis, no. Polygraphs, no. But because it wasn't a scientist who let it in.
What about jurors? You know, I understand the theory of jury of your peers, which we have perverted beyond its original meaning, because the original meaning was the people that know you and know your pattern of behavior and what should happen. And now it's people who don't know anything about anything that's going on.
Right, but are in some ways similar to you, but mostly whichever side of counsel chose the better, jury
and who
chooser
didn't
guy.
have a jury poll full of people that were able to make excuses to get the hell out of it. Knew the right words to say to get the hell out of it. So with all of that being said, I feel like I'm pretty smart. If I got called for a jury where you really had to dig into the forensic evidence and decide what's true and not true from experts, when I've just heard about this shit yesterday, I don't think that's fair to anybody.
I know. No, I agree. And I would like to say that the answer to that is, if there's reasonable doubt, then they get to leave.
But can I make an informed decision about reasonable doubt if I don't understand what they're telling me?
I know.
And that's like, I am college educated. I'm pretty smart. I'm able to do my own research and understand what good sources are cited. And I would like to think that I'm not in the minority, but I kind of think I might be.
I think so. I think so. And I think you also have an interest in it, right? And a lot of those people failed to get out of it.
And that's the other thing is I also know exactly the right things to get me out of it.
Yeah. But I never would, because I'd like to be on a jury just so I could watch everything. I will say that is the difference with DNA, and that's like the difference that people cite with DNA, is that it's not science that became science because a lawyer and a judge were like, yes, this counts as science, which is how almost all of the rest of forensic science came about. It went the other way. Like, it was science that they were like, oh, we could use this in a courtroom. And so that in itself seems to give it a whole lot of
But again, not to harp on OJ, but it was the first public case where DNA was really called into account. And you had a jury that's like, I don't know about this science bullshit. Even though they're up there being like, okay, so you have this string of information in your body, and if we take it from your body and we take it from a crime scene and they look the same, that means it was you. Unless you're an identical twin, then it could be the other one, but we don't think he is.
Right.
And even then the jury was like, so it was all over the crime scene and the shit in his house? Nah.
Right. No, I know. Which is sort of the opposite of what the trend is now, which is like, there was DNA at the crime scene. He did it.
Right.
It didn't really match it. He still did it. There was DNA.
There was DNA. Like the people.
Well, the prosecutor said DNA. This is going to be a quick one.
Convict.
Yep. All of them. So, I feel like that was a great discussion. It also was a good way to wrap up September, because guess what it is?
Is it Crime Cozy?
It's Crime Cozy. This is our last September episode.
Put on a sweater, light a candle, have some malt cider,
drink a pumpkin spice
if you're into that.
Oh my god. Okay. I have to point out the difference in generations that is happening here.
So
My millennial self recommended pumpkin spice latte, which
I
actually
never
I find
had one.
revolting. And you went all for mulled
I know,
cider.
because I love the way
you
it
old
smells.
woman. So yeah, Crime Cozy next month.
Yay.
Next episode. We're going to tell you about horrific things that you are
It's
probably
true,
scared
and we're going to do it a
of.
little bit differently if you joined us last October. This time, Erin is going to tell you terrible, terrible, terrible things.
I am. You know what? I think I'm going to mostly go with, I mean, they are certainly terrible, terrible, terrible things, but things that you might have a legitimate fear might happen to you. Like when you think of crimes you may fall victim of that scare you, those.
And
those are the
then
ones
I'm going to tell you they're probably not going to happen. And if they do happen, we're going to talk a little bit about how to maybe stop it or prevent it. That was a bad sentence, but you know where I was going.
Yeah.
Also,
Right. And also how
yes,
you can
there we go.
protect yourself against those crimes. Also, my call to action is do some research on the whole genetic DNA, like mapping and whatever that word is that I'm trying to say, police using your genetic data from websites to make familial matches and all of that. Figure out where you stand on it. And if you feel like this is a good thing and you feel confident that it is not at least any more damaging than anything else, you can go to Family Tree DNA and you can have your profile submitted so that it can be tested against suspect DNA. Help identify violent criminals.
Now I kind of want to. I hadn't before, but now I kind of want to.
I know. I think I kind of want to. Also, if that's something that you're interested in and you don't want to pay for the tests, there are ways to do that as well. I actually did not pay for mine because I participated in some medical research. So they used my profile. I answered a bunch of survey questions over the course of like 6 weeks. And then they matched up certain genetic markers to see if that played into, I think I did migraines. It was a migraine study. Because I don't know if y'all know this, but I get migraines.
I've heard.
Yeah. We've missed a couple episodes. But so you can do that. And then I think also, I'm fairly certain the Family Tree DNA one has an option where you can just submit your DNA. I don't know that they'll necessarily give you any profile information, but they will submit it to that catalog, cool. So it's available for law enforcement.
Do you want my advice?
And
okay. So it's going to start as a bummer, but it gets better. One of my favorite comedians died the week before Jeff did. It was very unexpected. He was young. He was 32 years old. And apparently the Emmys happened last night, which I found out about because I care so much about pop culture. I found out about because he was in the reel of people that had passed away during the year. So people in the groups on Facebook were posting screenshots of Kevin Barnett being honored in this way. And so I was thinking a lot about him today because he was a really great comedian and he was taken from us too soon by stupid disease. And he died right before Jeff. And I remember at the time thinking, you know, you make friends with these podcasts, even if they don't know it, you know, they're the friends in your phone. And I really thought Kevin would be with me to help me through this time. And he's not. So my advice to you guys is this. Go watch a comedy show. Or listen to a comedy podcast by like real comedians, not us, like actual comedians. Funny people.
Yeah, funny people.
Who aren't horrible monsters like me.
Or, you know, maybe they are, but they are at least a little younger. I was going to say funny, but you're sometimes amusing.
Go listen to a comedy show and then go hug your people. R.I.P. Bird Luger.
Definitely.
Hail yourself. Call your people.
Call your people. Check in on them. See if they submitted their DNA. See if your third cousin's brother was arrested. He would also be your third cousin.
Unless the third cousin's mother is a baby snatcher, then, you know, all bets are off, genetically speaking.
True.
And regardless of what I might tell you in other episodes, don't end up on next week's episode.